Going to go ahead and call this November 4th, 2019 meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Thanks everyone for coming this evening. We'll start with our Pledge of Allegiance. Hap, would you mind leading us tonight?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Hap. We'll move on to item 3 of our agenda, which is communications from the public. We do not have any public hearings advertised for tonight, so if you have anything you'd like to bring to the attention of the council, now would be your opportunity, and your name and address for the record when you approach the podium. Any public comment tonight? Not seeing any. We will stay with the audience. Any volunteer board reports from the audience? How about the council?
Bike Ped met this morning at 8:30, as we do on the first Monday of each month. I think the biggest thing that came out of that is the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, and I'll leave it to Craig to kind of discuss if he wishes, or just to say that, you know, BNSF is moving things along on 3 projects.
I don't know which microphone to speak into, so I'm going to use them both.
Oh, stereo.
This is coming to you in stereo. So we did recently just get a letter from BNSF, and it's actually on the agenda later here tonight. But we were excited to receive correspondence that BNSF has reviewed our request for a number of different easements or licenses or leases or however they wanted to provide them to us, and they were willing to extend our existing license for the BNSF loop to include a few different areas. And so those areas included the space that we need to construct the Baker Avenue underpass, to connect the future river path at the very north portion of the property that Casey Momquist owns, as well as a future connection for 95 Caro, which will be on the west, I don't know if I'm doing that, sorry, the west side of the railroad trestle that crosses the river. So it was an exciting letter to get. We've been working on this, as everybody's aware, for years and years, and all of a sudden out of the blue, a week ago Wednesday, we got this letter or correspondence from BNSF. So we'll talk more about it here later tonight, but it's good news.
That's it.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Craig. Andy?
We did, after our last meeting, have our Sustainable Tourism Master Plan open house here from 5 till 9 o'clock. And then the committee met the following morning for a couple hours to kind of digest a little bit of what we'd gone over. It was very well attended, I would say. We probably had, what, Craig, 150 people? Something like that? 125 maybe?
Yeah, I'd say 120 or so.
Yeah. It's very well attended. It was a number of stations that discussed individual things that are going on in our community. It sort of became a little bit of a laundry list of all things city, I think. I don't know how much of it was necessarily tourism related or sustainable tourism related, which was kind of the common feeling and part of the committee after when he met for follow-up. We're still on target to have a draft coming out in January roughly, so hopefully but it was pretty positive. I think that was the good thing. It wasn't a lot of people showing up complaining about what we do. It was just more observations of what goes on around town. So anyway, we're moving forward, I guess, would be the kind of best way to put it. So.
I assume that'll come to the council through a work session with the committee? Okay, great. Thanks, Andy. Further board reports from the council? Not seeing any. We'll move on to our consent agenda. Any changes or additions to the October 21 meeting minutes? And I bet Richard has some.
How did you know, Mr. Mayor? Yes, on page 22, last paragraph that begins with Richard Hildner. On the
You never know what we say something.
yeah, that sentence, the second sentence, it says, he believes thee, and change that to believes there, please. And on page 24, the paragraph that begins Chuck Bergensmith, and it's the third line down. Pier blocks were used, and later it says consistent, but I think continuous is the correct word there.
Thank you.
That's it.
With those corrections, can I have a motion, please?
You may, and I'll move with corrections to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously. Michelle, we do not have any public hearings scheduled under item 6, so we'll move on to item 7, which is communications from Dana, our interim city manager. You have Dana's written report enclosed with the packet. Any questions for Dana from the council? Richard.
Let me just get there for just a second, please. Yeah, I think that the comments that, first of all, that meeting with the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, as well as the city, both the city, thank you, Dana, you brought the A-team to that meeting, and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks did the same, and so I think it was very productive to discuss future actions to be taken. I really enjoyed the way you ran that meeting, that at the end you brought it all back together again, and that was wonderful. One of the tasks that I was given was to make contact with the school district about creating some PSAs with regards to garbage and bears, and things we can do to make our city a little more bear safe. I spoke with Ryder Delalloy at the school district, and he's going to float that out both at the middle school and the high school level. So we'll see what comes out of that, and we've agreed to touch base again probably by the end of this week.
Okay. Thanks, Richard. Further questions for Dana? Dana, anything additional to report on?
I'm just going to touch on one thing. In my manager's report, I discussed that we are not accepting ballots at City Hall. Tomorrow, obviously, you have to have your ballots down to Flat County, but I wanted to give a little bit more information why. The state passed, the voters of the state actually passed the Ballot Interference Prevention Act. That requires when dropping off ballots at a location, if you're dropping off not yours, but say your husband or your wife or family members, you actually have to be pre-registered to do so. And so it became an issue when we looked at holding, having a drop-off location here, having to have staff available to confirm that they were only dropping off their ballot, or if they were dropping off additional ballots, they would have to have a form completed. And they also, the county also had requested us to close our utility payment box to ensure that we didn't have people dropping off ballots in there. So because of those issues, that's why we did not have a drop-off location here. So please make sure that you have all of your ballots to the county by 8 p.m. tomorrow, and that does not include postmark dates.
Thanks, Dana. I appreciate the update. I find it fairly unfortunate that I've spoken with many individuals as early as this morning, or as late as this morning, who had every intention of dropping their ballots off at City Hall today or tomorrow, and to now be faced with having to drive to Kalispell, I just have a feeling it's going to result in lower voter turnout, which is always unfortunate. But thanks for the update, Dana. We'll move on to item 7C of our packet, which is the proposed BNSF license amendment for the Baker Avenue underpass and funding considerations for the council. Dana.
Thank you. This evening, as you've heard from Craig, we received word from BNSF regarding additions to our current trail licenses with them. Craig and his staff have worked really hard to add different portions of our trail to the current license. Surprisingly, they added the underpass portion of the easement we were seeking. Previously, we were working on negotiating a lease for that that had a much higher cost, and we were not getting anywhere really with those negotiations based on the term we were looking for. But we had met at a work session discussing TIF priorities a while back regarding this underpass, and the idea was that we continue to move forward. But there was concerns regarding the term of the lease that we were hoping to negotiate back then. So I wanted to bring this forward because the current license that we'd be adding this to, while there's no current financial impact for the next 10, 11 years, this does have a sunset date or an expiring term of May 19th, 2030. It does have an option for us to extend for 25 years, assuming that we have met all of the requirements within the license. And I think the biggest concern for it is that we know that this will come back up to market rate. So we need to be prepared to pay market rate rent for these licenses in the future. When we were negotiating for a lease with BNSF, originally they were looking about $6,700 with an annual increase of 3%. So I think it's something we can expect. But this is a very key part of our trail system to provide access to downtown. The cost for the amendment is actually $800, but that's simply more of a processing fee than anything. So we're looking for approval to both move forward with the agreement, but also approval of funding options. Unfortunately, it looks like the Transportation Alternative Grant will not be put out there for probably another year. And so this will not be an option to fund this project. If we're using TIF funds, we have to have this under contract and underway no later than July 15th of 2020. And really, when you get into change orders, that's where I'm a little bit more concerned on contracting those funds further after the 15th of July in 2020. So the majority of the project is within the TIF. I took a really good look at our easement versus the TIF district. I think we can fund the majority of this project using TIF funds that we have on hand. We will need to look at using a small portion of impact fees for a portion of the paved trail that's on the west side of the viaduct. But I think we can do so with planned projects that we have in the future, kind of reassigning those projects with different funds. So I provided you the current TIF pro forma this evening. Wasn't in the packet, but Michelle will append it. And just to look at some of the projects where you would be able to pull funds to fund this project. We did have, in total, we have $850,000 for blighted property. Those we're going to be looking at purchases for the Old Piccolo's building or other properties that might need to be redeveloped. We really haven't made any headway on those, and when you're looking at just over 6 months left, I think that you could easily reassign these funds for that project. So we've already assigned $400,000. You've committed $400,000. The estimate of the project is probably around $1.3 million. So you're looking for that difference, and I think through other items on here, such as the Washington Skiles wall replacement, that we believe is going to be a larger project than what is budgeted. So to include those funds for the Baker Avenue underpass would be a recommendation as well. So staff respectfully recommends that the City Council review the supplemental agreement, commit funding for the project using primarily TIF funds with a small portion from paved trails, impact fees, and provide authority for myself to execute the agreement. And then if that is the desire of the council, to look at establishing a consultant rating panel and selection panel for that project when hiring engineer to design the underpass, because time is of the essence for this project. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dana. We'll need a motion to that effect regarding the schedule and funding for the Baker Avenue underpass. Richard.
I'll move to approve continuing with the Baker underpass using TIF funds and impact fees as needed and assign authority to Dana to negotiate that, how did you call that?
Execute the
To execute
amendment.
the amendment.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Hennon. If we get concurrence, then we'll move on to a discussion regarding the process to hire the engineer. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion, I assume, carries unanimously, Andy? Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay.
A little slow on the uptake there.
Thank you, folks. And now, what would you like this rating panel and selection panel to be comprised of? A couple council members, staff, any thoughts there?
The rating panel needs to be 2 or more staff members, and the selection panel, which is really the interview panel, just needs to have 1 council member. So I guess my recommendation would be, on this one? How about Maria and I for the rating panel? And we should have worked this out ahead of time. And Maria, myself, and 1 council member for the selection committee.
Like to be the one council representative on the selection
Oh,
panel?
sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
Just let me know when. Oh, is it going to be after the first of the year? Oh, forget it.
It's after the first of the year. Okay. Who else would like to volunteer to be
Can't
on
have
the
a
selection
citizen
panel?
representative, can you?
I mean, I can, depending on
Andy, is that okay with you? Okay. Let's just get a quick motion on the table to that effect regarding the
I would move
rating panel and selection panels.
to appoint Craig and Maria to the rating panel and Andy in addition to the selection panel.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Further discussion? I would just say that if Andy, you're not available, I can step in if I'm home for sure. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks very much, Dana. And we'll move on to communications from the city council, and we will start with Richard.
Bears are still out, pick up the fruit. And Craig, can you give us the PSA on parking? Please.
The PSA remains on the odd days of the month. You park on the odd side, and on the even days, you park on the even side. Alternate side parking is in effect.
Thanks, Craig. Thank you,
That's it.
Richard. Andy? Thanks, Andy. Ryan?
No comment.
Thank you, Ryan. Katie? No comment. And I have no comment either. Further comments from staff? How about the council? We are adjourned.
Oh, my goodness.